campus and have the distinction of being what I like to call the logo popo. So, in terms of using our college and extension logos, I'm sort of the person that polices all that and also can help anybody that needs help with that sort of thing. So keep that in mind for future reference. My contact info will be at the end of all this. Let's talk a little bit about branding and why we should do it in the first place. Branding applies to all sorts of things. It's everywhere. I'm sure you recognize a few of these brands. Um, and what these folks are trying to do is stand out from the crowd and let you know that they're here and that they want to be here for you and they would like you to use their services. We're not much different than that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. I always like to use the Target logo as an example of branding that's really so effective that it doesn't need any words. You know, who would think that a red dot or basically a circle would be so identifiable that you can only see a piece of it and you know exactly who it is and what they're doing. For us, it's important to brand because we want people to identify with us as well. And part of the way we do that is by having something that people can identify with that's what I like to call a stamp of some sort. These programs exist to communicate the character and reputation of an institution, and they also will unify the communications of the organization. So in Extension, for example, whether it be the Master Gardener program or any of the other things that are happening through Extension, we really want people to know, the end user to know that those things are coming out of Extension, and the more that we can get that message across, the more that people are aware that Extension is important in their everyday lives. And when it comes to things like budget cuts that we all love to talk about, it's really great if our constituents know who we are so that they can go to bat for us. And that's one really important reason to brand. And that's one important reason that we like to be associated with the University of Georgia, because it is such a strong brand. The cornerstone of any visual identity program and a key to successful branding is an institution's logo, which is also, you'll hear me use these words interchangeably, a mark. So here I have one of the university's logos, and I think it's important to keep in mind for all of us that we're all a part of the University of Georgia, and we want to kind of have that message out there so that we can unify ourselves when it comes to communicating with the public. I don't know how many of you guys actually work with the university's logos, but I wanted you to be aware of this particular website that you can go to, which has all of the identity information for the university itself. It talks about the usage of the logos and what's correct to do, what's not correct to do, and that sort of thing. So as you're looking through these slides, just keep in mind that there are going to be some references in here that might be good to help you down the road. I wanted to show you, this is a part of that page where you can see that the different iterations of the logo are there for you to see and to use and to download. There's also information on that website about our official university colors and that sort of thing. The person that's in charge of the university's logos and the policies surrounding them is Allison Huff. This is her contact information now. One thing you should know in terms of what's going on at the university is in the past there's been a real separation of what is our academic logo, which is the arch that you see here, and then, of course, the Georgia G that has been primarily used by athletics. In the past, those have been very clearly separated, and now there's been some pressure to sort of see that Georgia G on some things that are not necessarily athletics. While we don't really encourage this, nor does Allison, there are some instances where that has been approved. But again, there are special things you have to go through to have that used on anything. So if anybody thinks about using that Georgia G, please go ahead and just contact me personally, and we can talk about that. What I mainly want to talk to you about today are our logos, meaning the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences logos and the Extension logos. Just as a logo is the cornerstone of a well-crafted identity program, the university's arch can be considered the cornerstone of both our college's logo and the Extension logo. The arch, along with the use of the university's official typeface, combined to create both of our logos, Extension and the College of Ag. And this just kind of goes back to that idea of the University of Georgia is our overarching, no pun intended, entity. And we want to be associated with them. And so we use colors, typefaces, graphic elements, i.e. the arch, to tie in with the university and yet brand ourselves. For anybody who would like to know, the official type family of the university is Galliard. It is what the words the University of Georgia are written in most of its iterations in terms of logo usage. And sometimes it's used in the body text for a lot of university publications. So just a fun fact if you would like to know that. This slide is showing you the iterations of our college's logo. The logo that you see on top, we call that the three-stack logo, is our sort of logo of choice, if you will. And that's the one that we like to brand most of our college's materials with. The one in the center is actually reserved for more formal uses, say an award or a formal invitation, things like that. And then the logo at the bottom, which is nice and long, the purpose of that is to just have a solution for folks who need to do something really large and long, for example, say a 16-foot banner, something like that. We generally try to stay away from using this sort of thing on printed pieces unless the format of that really dictates that. So for those of you who use the college's logo as opposed to the Extension logo, this one on the top is the preferred iteration of that. These are the new Extension logos, or relatively new. Some of you may have materials that have the old logo stuff on them, and that's perfectly fine. We don't want you throwing those out, but once you do have the opportunity to put things on new materials, we would like you to use this new logo. And yes, Brock, there are printed guidelines. There's going to be a website here I'm going to direct you to that you can go to, and I can also send you this show at the end. Okay, so back to this new logo. There are two sort of standard looks of this. The one at the top associates both the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences and the College of Family and Consumer Sciences, of which Extension is a part of both of these. We really try not to use this one too much. We're trying to simplify things a little bit, and so it's really this bottom one in this case that we want to see used on folks' materials. the one on the top, we use it sometimes for, say, if we're going to a trade show and we're making big window shade banners, something that's really large where that type can show on the bottom, and maybe we're sponsoring things with other people. That might be a typical use of this. But we'd really like to encourage you, when you're using the logos, to use the one that you see on the bottom here. Okay, this is a little bit in response to Brock's question. On our college's website, the website you see here, you're going to be able to download these logos in most cases, and you're going to be able to read about all kinds of guidelines about how to use them and what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what file formats are good for you to use in certain situations. And the main purpose of my presentation today is to go over some of those things and maybe clarify some stuff that might be confusing to people who are not particularly art folks or design folks or publication folks. So again, this is our overarching website here. And there are very similar websites. This one talks about extension logos and policies, and we've just broken them out. Most of the policies are the same, but we just have those two separate areas for people to look at so they can go specifically to either extension logos or the college's logos. What I'd like to talk to you about now is file formats for logos, because this is an area where people tend to have a lot of confusion or angst. So when you go to our website and you want to download one of these logos, you're going to see two file formats. One of them is EPS and the other one is JPEG. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the differences in those and when you should use one versus the other. And again, this is on our website. Okay, first, the EPS logo. What you need to know about that is, number one, if you're producing materials that you're going to have done anywhere else besides you're printing them off of your own printer, if you're sending something to a t-shirt vendor or a printer or anybody outside of your little area, EPS files are the industry standard for sending logos to people. What EPS stands for is Encapsulated PostScript, if anybody cares about that. But what's important about these files, this is the really critical thing, and I'll talk about a little more, is it's a vector-based file. And what that means is that when the programs are generating that logo, they're doing it based on math. So every time you enlarge that, they're calculating a mathematical equation. And what that means is that an EPS logo is infinitely scalable. And what I mean by that is you can take that EPS logo from our website and you can put it on a postage stamp or you can put it on the side of the building. And either one of those is going to be clear and crisp. It makes no difference how large or small it is other than smallness for readability. So if you wanted a billboard, for example, it would make no difference that you blew that up to the size of the billboard. It would stay perfectly clear. The other thing to know about EPS files is that they have a transparent background. And what's important about that is that you can put them on colors. So if you had a brochure that was red and you wanted a white logo on there, you would see the white logo, but you wouldn't see a white box around it. So hopefully this visual here will give you an idea of what I'm talking about. These are examples of EPS files, and all these were generated from the same logo, from the same EPS file. You can see that they're all crisp. Doesn't matter how large that arch is or how small, it still doesn't have what we like to call jagged edges on it. Okay, let's talk about the JPEG file and how it contrasts with that a little bit. JPEG files were originally, I guess, invented, I guess we could use that word, by photographers. And so what JPEG stands for is Joint Photographic Experts Group. What's important to remember about that is that word photographic. A logo, a mark, is not a photograph. It's a graphic art file. So really, when you think about logos, you should think about EPS files. When you think about photographs, JPEGs are the way to go, okay? The thing about a JPEG is it is a pixel-based file, and what that means is that all the pixels are the same size, and when you enlarge those pixels, things degrade. So a JPEG file is not infinitely scalable. It will not look good if you try to put it on the side of a building or put it on a billboard, and it will not have a transparent background. So let's look at this next slide. These are JPEG files. The first thing that you'll notice is they all have a white box around them, so my gray background cannot come through. The second thing you'll notice about them is at the bottom right one, the cooperative extension is nice and clean and crisp, but when you get to the one on the left, those are the pixels. Those are those pixels just getting jaggy, okay? So EPS, clear and crisp anywhere. JPEGs degrade depending on what size you use them at. So which should you use? One of my favorite slogans, just for life in general, I guess, is begin with the end in mind. And this is something that you really need to think about when you're working with publications, because you want to ask yourself, what am I doing this for and how am I going to produce it? Because if you're just printing it off in-house on your little inexpensive printer, that's one thing. But if you're sending it to a magazine for an ad insert, or you're having a commercial printer produce your piece, things are going to be a little bit different about how you set things up. So again, EPS files are the industry standard for art and graphic files, okay? And you can use those words interchangeably. The other thing is always supply to your vendors EPS file. And if you have vendors that don't know what an EPS file is, get another vendor, because they don't know what they're doing, okay? So EPS files, go to vendors. EPS files will work in all of your programs. People are used, I think most common folk, right, not art people, are really more familiar with those JPEG files, but I'd really like you to think a little bit about this EPS file and all that it has to offer. It works in all your popular page layout programs, all word processing programs. Okay, for JPEGs, that's the industry standard for photographic files. The other place that we use JPEG files are for the web. And there's just a note here I want to let you know that the JPEG files that are on our website, they are high-resolution files, which means they're going to have some flexibility in how large you can use them, but that flexibility is limited, okay? So you're probably not going to be able to make that logo any bigger than, say, 6 inches, 5 or 6 inches wide. And another usage for these JPEG files is when you're printing on non-PostScript printers, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But basically, most people have what we call inkjet printers or personal desktop printers, and those printers generally are not PostScript. Now, that PostScript word, if you remember from EPS, PostScript was one of the words in that. So what happens if you print on your inkjet printer an EPS file, it may not even show up. It may show up as a box because your printer doesn't have the brain power to read that file. Whereas if you go to a commercial printer, that's exactly what they need, is that EPS file. So if you're doing a document that you're going to just print out in-house and your printer is maybe not the greatest in the world, say you paid less than a couple $100 for it, you're probably going to want to use a JPEG file. Because what's going to happen is your printer's not going to be able to read that EPS file. Okay, one of the biggest things when people first start working with EPS files, when they download them from our website, is they want to click, once they've downloaded it, they want to click on that file and they want to see it. Well, funnily enough, you cannot do that. You're not really supposed to be able to open an EPS file. That's kind of the purpose of the EPS file, because if you could open it, then you could move things around and do all kinds of things that we might rather you not do. So if you're downloading these EPS files from the site, don't worry, don't click on them and try to look at them. You saw what they look like on the website. What you need to do is put it in a place on your computer where you can find it, and then whatever you're working in, if you're working in a word processing document or PowerPoint, just use whatever command that you would use to place art into that program. You use that command. It might be insert picture, it might be place, it might be get picture, it might be get graphics. But anyway, just think about it as I'm going to get this piece of art and I'm going to place it in my document. And once you go and get it and you place it, it's going to be in your document. And once it's in your document, you can resize it, you can move it around, you can do whatever you want. So don't freak out when you cannot open an EPS file. Just think, I've got to get it where I want it. I've just got to put it in my document, and then I can work with it. Okay? This is another concern that I talked a little bit about the EPS files. When your EPS file looks awful, it's because your printer is not a PostScript printer. Okay? So if you're the one producing the final output and that's all you have is your, not so great printer, then use a JPEG file. Just note when you use a JPEG, you're not going to be able to put a colored background on it. Okay, it's always going to have a white background. Okay, so what I'd like you to think about is use those EPS file formats unless you're putting a logo on a website or you're producing something on your own inkjet non-PostScript printer. Okay? All right, these are just screenshots of our website. Basically, I'm showing them so you get just a little visual recognition of what you're going to see when you go to our site. Basically, when you go, there are going to be instructions for downloading the file, and you're going to see the different versions of the logos that you can get. I don't know that you can really see on this screen, but down here in the bottom, with my lovely pen mark there, they're different file formats. So you're going to see the EPS file. You're going to see the JPEG file. This also has a PMS file on it, which we've gotten rid of just because it's not really used by many people besides us. So what you're going to see on there is EPS and JPEG. So you just want to go to the one you want, click on it, and begin the downloading process. Okay, let's move on and talk about once you've gotten the logo that you want, what are appropriate things to do with it, what are not appropriate things to do with it. And let me just say one thing up front. We have, obviously, the college logo, which you see in the bottom left of my slides, and we have the extension logo. On your publications, you should not have both of those things. When you're branding, you want to be clear about where it's coming from and whose basically stamp is on it. Okay, so when you're doing your publications, if you're out of extension, you should be using the extension logo, and if you're not, you should be using the college's logo. Okay, so the first point is that when you're using a logo, please use the logo that's from authorized artwork. What that means is use one of the logos that you've downloaded from our website, not one that your grandmother made for you in the basement. Okay? As noted before, the 3-line logo is the preferred logo for usage. And the Flush Left logo, what that means, Flush Left, let me get my magic pen here again. See how the college and the E, all that lines up? That's Flush Left.